Welcome to Monsters in Multiclass. I'm Eliotti.
I'm Jared Bornagle.
And I'm Will Meldon.
And on this episode, we are doing something a little different. For those who have been around for a while, you know we're very much a Dungeons & Dragons podcast. Well, today we're talking about Pathfinder, specifically 2nd edition. We started on this path actually a while ago, before all the OGL stuff started happening with Wizards of the Coast and D&D. But that kind of just furthered, there we go, that's the word, furthered us looking into it. And we've played a couple games of Pathfinder, really dove into the rules. I'm joining another full campaign in Pathfinder, and we figured, all right, we know a lot about D&D. Let's talk about the differences we see, what we like, what we don't like. Kind of just, it's going to be a pretty free-form discussion on it, and just diving into our differences between Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Pathfinder.
Yep. And so to start off, just, it was, as Ellie's mentioned, we've played a couple of times at this point. I've run, I think, 2-3 games or something like this point, or we've played 3. It all started when we went to Gen Con, and I was already like Pathfinder curious, but we walked by a couple of their like arts features and everything, and I was just like, yo, something about that is really drawing me in. And so we found out they were like doing the test dungeon or whatever on the floor, and immediately after playing, it was like, all right, we need to do more of that. And I think both of us bought the books and we're like, let's figure this out. So to start things off, though, let's just kind of talk about the general feel after we've played a couple of times, because I think that's like the one thing that is kind of we wanted to preserve. I know I wanted to preserve very much. It was just like, is this still going to feel like our regular TTRPG night, when we play fantasy games around the table? And I'll just say my first thought was it kind of feels the same from that regard. Like I never once, as we've been playing, have been like, whoa, Pathfinder is just totally different from a tone feeling, besides this like kind of grittier feeling that I get out of it. And I can't really put my finger on why, but that's like the one difference for me.
Okay, when it comes to tone, sure. I mean, that's so dependent, though, on the adventure you run, and the characters, the table, all that. I do get what you're saying, though, because like you ran it as you do your normal campaigns, which usually aren't super gritty, because that's not what we do. But it did have a little bit of that feeling, and I'm wondering if that's the healing rolls. In D&D, it's very heroic feeling, where you take a long rest, and you're healed up to full. In Pathfinder, it's not. There's more complex rest rules, and it usually takes longer. And you kind of know as you're getting hit and losing health, this is a bigger deal. I don't know if maybe that has something to do with that.
Yeah, maybe we'll figure out more as we talk about it. I definitely haven't been able to place my finger on it, but that sounds like you're on the right path.
I mean, literally in Dungeons and Dragons, like they use, good pun. All right, they use heroic versus gritty realism to differentiate the rest rule variants, where the harder ones where you don't just heal up after a good night's sleep is called the gritty realism rest variant.
Right.
So it definitely does give that feeling to it.
But otherwise, like actually getting into kind of the meat of the game, I think the big thing that we can't even have the rest of this conversation about unless we start with it is the action economy. Because if you know anything about Pathfinder 2nd edition, you know that they have the 3 action economy versus Dungeons and Dragons having the action, bonus action, movement all be kind of separated. With Pathfinder 2nd edition, you've got 3 actions, and that relates to everything you can do. Moving is an action, attacking is an action. There's no real limits on what you can do as long as it falls within those 3 actions and a reaction should you have something for it. And I don't know, just kind of first thoughts on that. Will, how do you feel about the 3 action economy after playing a couple of games now?
I am absolutely cheesed about the 3 action economy. It is wonderful. One of my biggest complaints about D&D has always been that there's the tendency among optimizers and non-optimizers to fish everything out of the action, bonus action, reaction economy. And there's just a very limited path to do that. Whereas Pathfinder, where everybody has 3 actions and nobody has the default reaction opportunity attacks, you have so many different ways to say, I'm going to do this with my 3 actions. There's an entire little chapter in Pathfinder called Actions. and that's cool. I think a lot of people in D&D liked the idea that like an action was whatever you wanted it to be, bro, but it didn't really pan out that well. And it's so much more limited.
Yeah, I mean, you even see it with things like the ongoing debate of should taking a potion be an action or a bonus action, because making it your entire action makes it feel like so detrimental to your entire turn that it can't even be justified unless you are literally saving somebody's life. Why would I take a potion? So you end up as a DM giving all of these potions and such, and people are like, I'm not going to touch it, because at the end of the day, my best move is to use my actions to do damage to try and kill things rather than wasting a whole turn trying to get a buff out there.
And that's actually that's the dual-sided positive to the 3-action economy, is that you can make things that are less requiring of an action be 1 action. You can make something that's a big deal 3 actions. D&D does not really have that.
Right, there's no equivalent of, oh, this takes up your action and your bonus action.
Yep.
No. And I absolutely love that as options, especially with like spell casting, which I'm not super familiar with the spell casting rules, but I do know there's spells where you could choose to cast it as 1 action, 2 actions, or 3 actions, and get more powerful effects as you go.
The most common one that comes to mind for me is the heal spell in Pathfinder, which is, I think, at 1 action, it's like a touch spell. At 2 actions, it's a 30-foot range spell. And then at 3 actions, it's a healing aura. So you've got 1 spell that now feels like it's actually kind of 3 different spells. You've got your cure wounds, your healing word, and your mass healing word, all kind of put into a single spell. And it gives it, access earlier, but still gives a lot of meat to the spell. And just offers decisions.
Mm-hmm. And also related to that, not to go too far off on a tangent on spells, because I do also have more stuff to say on the action economy. The sustaining a spell, where in D&D it's concentration, like a good spell that has an ongoing effect has concentration, and it's a binary thing. You're concentrating or you're not concentrating, and your concentration can be forcefully broken and things like that. Where in Pathfinder, you could choose to spend 1 of your 3 actions to sustain the effect of a spell if it's an appropriate spell to do so, and you could even have multiple of those going, which is so cool and so much versatility. And I love everything about that. I've yet to really dive into a spellcaster. Come to think of it, in the campaign I'm joining, I'm also not a spellcaster, so I guess I'm shooting myself in the foot there. But it is really
playing
cool.
more one shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole idea, and maybe I'll save it for when we go down the rabbit hole of spellcasting. But I've
versus marshals, and
thoroughly enjoyed the versatility from that. Now, in terms of the action economy, back to what you were saying, Will, of the freedom to have so many different options, it really seems like it opens up the floor for what your character can do on a turn. And that part has been really freeing. The thing that does feel weird, though, is having movement be an action. I know that's one where we're like, oh, there's so many things you can do. Like, it's my turn. I've got all these 3 actions. And you're like, all right, I move forward, I attack, and now I want to run away. Oh, God, that's 3 actions, too. I can't do anything else. So definitely a big adjustment for me there. That feels odd. And even for monsters, it can be really tough when, you're focused more, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about monsters, but usually Pathfinder is touted as you can have 1 single monster against 4 people, and it's generally pretty balanced. It really can feel limiting when you've only got 3 actions and you're looking at 12 on the other side of the fight. And it's hard to kind of manage those from a DM side to make sure that you are offering up a challenge, but also going against whatever debuffs the party's putting against your monster, like being tripped 3 times.
For sure. The movement thing, it felt, and honestly, at first it just felt bad. Like, used to D&D where movement is its own thing and you can move willy-nilly freely how you want. And now in Pathfinder, to move it is one of your actions. I guess I should have looked at the specifics too. If you use like half of your speed and do an
That's
attack, Okay, then if you want to move away the same half of your speed, that's a third action.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, it doesn't initially feel great, but it is just an adjustment because in reality, you're really not losing anything compared to D&D because you do have the 3 actions to play with, and there are plenty of times where you don't need to move, and that really, really opens up your turn and creativity and what you can do, which helps a ton with martials, like martial characters feeling versatile and powerful instead of just running up and hitting, which is a problem in D&D a lot of times. So in Pathfinder, it's also just means positioning is significantly more important. If you could position yourself or have some sort of reach where you don't have to take up an entire action to move, that becomes so much more important. And I love that. I love that tactical feel. In D&D, positioning is important, but only to a degree because your movement's pretty free and easy to get in, very open if I could split it up. It's kind of like fuzzy, just like as long as you're kind of in this general area, you're usually okay. Opportunity attacks lock things down a bit more, but a lot of times there's ways to get around them, or you just kind of tank it, and it's often not a huge deal. Where in Pathfinder, you really, really want to position yourself well. And like I said, I love that tactical aspect of it, that decision making space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's one of the few times as well where uh, in Pathfinder it actually ends up feeling simpler than trying to explain the action economy of 5th edition. As we go through this is not all going to be a Pathfinder love fest. There are a couple of negatives, and the main one that's going to keep coming up is complexity. For brand new people, there's it's a little hard to understand certain concepts in Pathfinder, but I don't think the action economy is one of those. I think that's actually much, much simpler. I can't tell you how many times I'm playing with a new person and they want to try something and they say, oh, well, I've got my bonus action, or, oh, can I do 2-weapon fighting because I have a bonus action available and it says I can do that. And just that conversation happens over and over again. And it's so much easier just to say, you've got 3 actions. If you have used 3, you've used 3. If you haven't, you haven't.
Right, exactly. Yeah, a lot of new players feel like bonus action needs to be like something they have to do every turn when it's so class dependent and
It
subclass
is,
dependent, where some characters will never have use, and that's okay. They're not balanced around it.
but
But then it feels really bad for them.
it is like optimal to get a use of your bonus action, though. I think as Will was saying earlier, I mean, if you ask an optimizer the best way to utilize a rogue, it's getting some way to bonus action attack, so you've got a second chance at sneak attack should you already be whatever in a situation to get it. So it's, you're right, and obviously rogues have other uses for bonus action, but point stands, it just feels like I have this blank space on my character sheet and I need to fill it out because you have to utilize every single nook and cranny of it.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
the noob's intuition. The noob doesn't understand
Noob.
that, like,
Haven't heard
Polar
the term
Master.
noob in a while.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
This
it's
is a man who grew up in World of Warcraft, so probably
I
spelled
pwned
it
a lot
NE.
of noobs in my day. Walking around the Barrens alone, you were done. But yeah, they don't get that Polar Master is a game changer, but they get that there's a blank space. Whereas Pathfinder, they do clarify, you have these 3 things to do, figure out what to do with them. And I think the biggest benefit to that is boxing people in and saying, hey, these are what you can do with your actions. You don't have to look up guides. You can give people a big list of things you can do every turn. And that's one mentality you just have to get people used to, is you need to know what you're doing with all 3 turns, because they interestingly broke like multi-attack in the heads of D&D players by saying, you can attack again. You can attack 3 times at level 1, but you're going to miss. You got a -10 to it.
Right, and that should definitely be explained. That was the big difference I wanted to bring up. While talking about actions, best I could see, there's no like extra attack feature. But there is the ability, since you have your actions and it's very open, you can just attack and then attack again and attack again if you're positioned correctly for it. But there is a multiple attack penalty where the first attack is your normal plus to hit. And that works similar to D&D of how it's calculated, your strength or your dex plus proficiency and things like that. And then if you attack again, you have a -5 penalty to that to hit. And if you attack a third time or more, it's a -10 penalty to that to hit. And it's effectively kind of evens out the feeling like extra attack in D&D because at like level 1, 2, and 3, that -5 is so detrimental. It's like you're probably not going to hit, but you sometimes will, and that feels really nice when you do. And it gives you that versatility. And then as you level up, numbers get a lot higher in D&D and a -5. I'm sorry, in Pathfinder. And a -5 and a -10 is not as detrimental in Pathfinder 2nd Edition as it is to D&D. So you stop feeling it less. And then there's also ways to negate it. There's weapons that will lower the multiple attack penalty. There's class feats you could pick. And we definitely need to talk about character creation because that's really, really cool. Of how ways you could, it's not extra attack, but it kind of feels like it. Like if there's a fighter feat at first level you could get where you could attack with both, if you're dual wielding, attack with both weapons at the same time with the same attack penalty for both attacks, but then it counts as 2 at the end, and just cool stuff like that. And I like that versatility and how it's not like if you want to attack a lot, if you want to be good at hitting, it's not like you have to pick a fighter or somebody who gets extra attack.
Yeah, and that actually segues well into my next topic here of bounded accuracy versus big numbers. I don't know what they call it in Pathfinder, but it's big numbers. That was something that when we first started, I think we had a lot of conversations in our online chat of just like I've got a plus 30 AC. Is that normal? It's like, yes, this is normal. like, but I've got, what was it? You had 27 or something and a cleric had 24. And you're like, something about this just feels wrong. Like, why do I only have a +3? I'm in like full plate. I've got -5 movement, all this stuff. And then we kind of got to the table and started playing and it was like, oh, those numbers mean a lot. It, and a lot of Pathfinder comes down to buffs and debuffs in a way that 5th edition does not handle at all. They just kind of do, you either have advantage or disadvantage. Much, much simpler system. There's a reason why advantage and disadvantage has gotten so popular, and a reason why it works within bounded accuracy, which I guess if you're not familiar, can anyone explain bounded accuracy succinctly? I don't think I could.
Number not big.
I'm not good at succinct.
Number not big, and it never gets very big because it always stays within a small limit.
Yeah. And that's basically saying like AC and within D&D stays within usually like 16 to at the very high end 22, and it's usually everyone's just kind of a little bit off of each other, and then plus to hits stay roughly around there as well.
Right. Whereas in Pathfinder, you can start getting to the point of having a +30 for things in higher levels, which is obviously, more than we were saying the high end of AC is in D&D.
Yeah, in our level 6 thing that we just ran, I played a fighter and I had +18 to hit with a flail. And like I didn't like do anything super crazy to get that. Yeah. And 29 AC if I took cover behind a tower shield. It's just like those are numbers you don't see in D&D. It's insane.
Yeah, the Tarrasque, for instance, has a 25 AC, which is just like, what the hell is that? Numbers, but that's just like level 6 at Pathfinder,
Yeah.
Because the accuracy is unbounded.
So, I think the thing you will often hear about Pathfinder is how the math is really fine-tuned, and it is hard to see that when you're looking at your +18s and your 30 ACs and even higher in higher levels and everything. But then when we were playing it really did feel smooth. Like I had a monster that was at your level. It was a level 6. We were playing a level 6 one-shot, and it was hitting roughly 60% of the time or so, and it felt much less swingy. And I think that's what is taken away is even with you all throwing debuffs on it, where it had, -3 to its attacks, that first attack likely was going to hit every single time. The second, and if it attacked the third time for whatever reason, those ones felt like it was kind of a crapshoot. I'm hoping for that natural 20 or something, but it really felt consistent, which for monsters is so important because I've had way too many fights in Dungeons and Dragons that just come down to dice and are total duds because, the numbers just weren't in my favor this time.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that matters. I've been trying to think about it, and I don't have like the mind for that sort of like abstract math, if I'm just being honest. It's like, it feels like intuitively it shouldn't matter. It's like, sure, the numbers are bigger in Pathfinder, but they just scale differently, where in D&D they kind of stay more the same, and it should work out the same, where it's just a swingy based on the dice. But it definitely didn't feel that way. So I don't know if anyone has any insight.
My personal insight is that by allowing the numbers, by freeing the numbers,
Unbounding, unchaining.
by unbounding the numbers, you unbound the player. The player may now focus on what they want to be good at.
Will and Ray are formed today.
Yeah.
But if you want to be more accurate in D&D, you don't have options at all. There's one thing I can think of off the top of my head is the archery fighting style.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, whoa, you get +2 to hit. You can't focus that. You can't be better at hitting people with a flail. And you can't make monsters that are surprisingly accurate, or maybe even on the opposite side, surprisingly inaccurate, but hit like a truck. There's just so much you can do when the numbers are unbound.
Yeah.
Yeah, more wiggle room.
And what do you sacrifice? You sacrifice simplicity, because now you're having to do much larger math. And I personally did not find the math of Pathfinder to be a heavy cognitive load while running monsters. I know some people struggle with adding and subtracting and trying to keep all of the modifiers in their head. That's okay. It's fine. I didn't think I was concerned that Pathfinder was going to be difficult, but it didn't feel that bad. And I think a lot of that came from the ability to have less monsters, being able to only run 1 or 2 and still have it be a challenging fight, versus 5th edition, where I'm putting 7 monsters on the field, and now I have to remember which of them have Bane, which of them are held, which of them have poison, like all these different status effects that are rolling around in my head. It ends up feeling a lot heavier than remembering that they've got a +17 to hit and they're currently flanked and it's their second attack. So that's -5, -2 comes out to +10. Like, that's really simple, and it's just basic addition and subtraction. And that's all that I'm doing, compared to, I won't say trying to remember a bunch of status conditions. Pathfinder has that issue too. There's a lot of status conditions, but
what I think helps with that is offloading some of that load onto your players. And like, you do that in D&D, and it's no different in Pathfinder. Now there's just like modifiers as well. Someone's going to roll a hit, or a monster's going, and then I pipe up and say, oh, don't forget, me and Logan are flanking them, so they got -2. And then Will says, oh, and I did this evil eye thing and they got -1, or whatever. It's the same thing. Like, we do that with statuses all the time. Whoever put the status on the monster reminds you when it comes up. A lot, not all the time, a lot of the time.
Yes.
So it just kind of felt like it worked the same as that. It was just an extension. Keep the players involved.
And so to talk more about unbounding your players as you have, Will, the flip side of things is, not only can you feel really good when you're trained in something, but also you feel really bad when you're not trained in something. And that is something that, if you've been listening to the podcast, I love. I hate the idea of a barbarian rolling a natural 20 and on an Arcana check and knowing something that a wizard who's been training their entire life in it doesn't, because they rolled a 5 this time around. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't make the player feel good, because they have invested in a skill and they're not being rewarded for it. It makes things feel much more luck-based instead of build-based. And this is, I think, totally personal preference. There are people who love that idea of the dumb barbarian knows the thing this one time, because it's like, it's funny, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to personal preference, I highly fall in the category of, if you are an expert in something, you should feel like an expert in it.
100%. Yeah.
And that's a great way to phrase it, because you can't be an expert at something in D&D. You can be proficient.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the tier system, which we should also go into. But I 100% agree with you on that aspect, because there is, in D&D, since everything's bounded, you have 0 to +7 is a really big modifier within D&D to a skill. In Pathfinder, it's not that hard to get to +15 very early on. So you make skill checks like a 25 DC. And so it doesn't matter if the entire table wants to roll, only those with like that plus 15 have much of a chance at getting it. And the barbarian who would have a plus 0 to the arcana because they have 10 intelligence and no training in it, I have no chance of ever getting it. And it just works out a lot better. And if you do want those situations where there is a chance for someone to randomly know it, just put the DC down to a 19 or 20, where they could, in theory, happen to roll it.
Right, but then also realistically, the wizard has a plus 17 or something, and there's a really low chance that they're going to fail it. So even if the barbarian knows, or whatever, somebody untrained in it, it's still kind of like this. Oh, why do you know that? And it's still there, you know. But imagine like the role playing scenario of the extremely intelligent person, you know, going into a long soliloquy about how they know something and why they're so intelligent for knowing it. And the barbarian's like, yeah, I already knew that because one time I was, you know, doing this dumb thing and I learned about it anyways. Like, you still have it. It's just it's not overshadowing the player who's supposed to be good at it most of the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've talked about that. It's the issue is you look at the numbers, you get plus, let's say plus 12 as your ridiculously good at things modifier. That's 50% of the number. The rest, 20 is just too much to leave the fate. There's no sense of being good at stuff. And the tier system is great. I don't remember what the numbers are, but you can go from trained at something, which is like base proficiency.
I think it's 2, 4, 6, 8.
Yeah, 2, 4, 6, 8 plus 8 because you're proficient to a mastery level. That's awesome.
And then that's plus your level.
Plus your level.
Yeah.
So,
Which is that's another thing. The proficiency system in D&D was very, very simple and easy to grasp, but it just keeps you up with what happens in the world around you, and that's it.
That's true. You never truly feel like you're an expert unless you go into a class that gives you the expert feature or whatever. Yeah, expertise, which rogues and I think bards get, right?
Yeah, bards get it. Okay. Rangers get a version of it.
Right.
And it's just doubling your proficiency bonus. It's another very binary thing, and that really only goes up every few levels when your proficiency bonus goes up. Yeah, just a little more detail on the Pathfinder proficiency system. It is tiered, as Will was saying, where you're untrained, trained, expert, master, or legendary. And it advances as your character advances, and you have different ways to advance your skill level, your trained level in the class. And I absolutely love that, as for all the reasons said. And it really does feel like it makes a big difference, too, as you go up. And then related to it, another way to make it even more important, because, I mean, I guess technically the difference between trained and expert is just plus 2. Which when you have like plus 18 already doesn't feel huge, but since there is still a d20 roll being played into it, it's a 10% difference, which does matter. That is considerable. There's then the skill feats as well, where each skill in it has dedicated feats to it that you just get for free. You don't have to like skip an ability score improvement for it. Just certain classes get different skill feats at different levels, and I'm sure there's other ways to get it that I'm not familiar with yet. And they are gated based on your proficiency, your trained level in the skill. Where you get, if you're just trained, you could take one of these 3. If you're expert, you get these extra 4. If you're master, you get these extra ones. And of course, they are better as you go up. And that's just so cool. I love it. I love the flexibility. I love the nuance to it. I love the gradation it puts between, the customization, the gradation it puts between different characters and what you could take.
Yeah, and I love when people like, comment, and subscribe. Boom, hit it in midway through the episode. If you're enjoying the content, or if you have thoughts and feelings about 5th edition versus Pathfinder, or just whatever, then leave a comment. Love to hear it. We're not done yet. We've got plenty more to talk about.
Yeah,
but enough about the bounded accuracy versus big numbers. I think we could probably keep talking about that for a while, but I think our point has been made. Let's switch focus a little bit to the adventuring day. So this is one that varies actually really heavily from 5th edition to Pathfinder, where in 5th edition, as everyone has probably heard a bajillion times, the day of an adventure was supposed to be focused around 6 to 8 encounters as you are trying to wear down resources for your spellcasters, for whatever hit points that a character has, to keep a level of tension and difficulty. Pathfinder does not operate on that mentality at all. Each encounter really is supposed to have its own merit, and you are expected to basically be at full at the start of every single encounter, be it your health, potentially spells. That obviously goes down throughout the days. The casting is somewhat similar, but then you have things like focus spells, which are more like a warlock's short rest spells, where they just kind of come back after 10 minutes or an hour or so of focusing, I believe is the phrase used. So, Will, if you have any first thoughts on that, let's start with you.
I think this is less critical than anything else in Pathfinder because it is just totally. This was never a limitation on anybody to be completely honest. It's how you played the game, but the attitudes I think are good because I think D&D set this expectation, and everyone was just like thunderstruck when they heard like, oh yeah, 6 to 8 encounters a day. It's like, what game are you playing? Nobody here does that at all, ever. That's like maybe once every campaign that will happen. And so, I mean, we've talked about this. We've done this at the tables. We just completely devoted to the idea of finding a way to make it feel like resources need to be managed because they just didn't. And Pathfinder, I think, kind of hard codes a way to make it feel more serious with it's not like gritty realism, which is just kind of exhausting and it flattens the game. But this, the healing, the way things like come back make a lot more sense. And I think that the other thing is we talked about characters trying to figure out how not to leave things on the table in D&D is always a little bit obfuscated and you have to dig it out. So you're like looking at your short rest things that come back and you're like begging the DM for a short rest, but it just kind of fucks up the balance. Whereas Pathfinder, they kind of got rid of that and there's a way to get stuff back in a short amount of time, but not get everything back.
Sure. Yeah. Now that said, I do feel like the resource management aspect is made, it's easier as a DM to slowly whittle down resources and to feel like you can increase the tension throughout an adventuring day. Whereas Pathfinder, I won't say the tension always stays the same, but it does make things like weak encounters a lot more pointless. So in 5th edition, if I'm trying to work you guys up to a big battle at the end, I know that I need to wear down some resources. Otherwise, you're going to Nova the encounter and it'll be over and not have the level of tension that I'm looking for. So I'll throw a couple of smaller combats at you in order to use up resources, be it health, be it spells, be it items, I mean, whatever, just to kind of get that out of the way. It might fit into the story, or I might wrap the story around those encounters in order to have them make sense. But regardless, it's a slow buildup of, again, multiple things. Pathfinder, that's not necessary. And I don't know if I think that's good or bad yet. I just think it's different. So now let's take a thing that you all went through recently. You had a fight with a purple worm. That turned into like a 2-session ordeal because you had to go out into the forest, you fought some oozes, you fought some worms, those whittled down your resources, and then it was a matter of, we need to get back because we're all dying, we're very, very hurt, and either we get back safely and we can rest up and Nova the purple worm, or it's going to find us and absolutely obliterate us, which it didn't. It actually ended up being an extremely tense combat where almost everyone died because your resources were limited. I can't help but wonder if I would have been able to achieve that same level of tension with Pathfinder's, always full mentality.
So where are you getting that you're always full?
That's just the idea is that you always have full health. Again, spells are going to go down. That is a thing, but classes just are less resource based in comparison. So general consensus I've seen from the community is that being at full when an encounter is kind of set up is expected and balanced around that.
Okay. Yeah, with that in mind, it definitely does feel like it'll be harder to ratchet up the tension.
Yeah, so I'm keeping
Yeah,
an eye on it is really where I'm at with it. I don't have like a flat out set in stone opinion.
I know when we have played, I didn't feel that. Um, I guess I don't. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on it either because it just didn't like. I didn't feel it in either direction when we played. Like, oh, I was missing that as we went on. Versus, oh, this feels better or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have a strong opinion on this. So, yeah, D&D is a resource management game. No, it's not. Wrong.
It is.
Will's coming out against this. This is what I will say. I think that the whittled down stuff it's okay, but there's an element of it that robs players of tactical agency because the DM has the path in their head and the player does not. The player can make decisions and predictions, but it's a coin flip. They don't know if they're wasting shit on shit that they are going to need later. And that's not good. I think it's a necessity in D&D just because of the way the game is. But I think that it is better for the players to have their full set of tools going into encounters because it lets them make impactful choices. If you just wander into an encounter with none of your resources left because you didn't know what was coming up, I mean, yeah, you're weaker, but not because of anything you did necessarily, like with knowledge of what's going on. It's just that's how the dice rolled, essentially.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fair. I think a way that I've thought of it is it does have the ability to kind of remove the filler aspect, which often is necessary in 5e. And I think you bring up a good point as well. Just being able to allow the players that kind of choice. So to look at it from a different perspective here, using that recent example of the Purple Worm adventure. When you all tried to run back to town and rest up to get back to full, that wouldn't have been necessary in Pathfinder because you all could have just stuck it out in a little hiding spot that you had for the night and then been ready the next day. The entire idea of trying to get back to the town may not have been a necessary thing to go through. That I won't say I had to stop you from. There was a chance for you to get back. Just really poor dice rolls made it not happen. But it does almost free me up to make every encounter be a meaningful one every single time instead of needing to make filler content.
Yeah, and we need to keep in mind we use homebrew custom rules for it to get there anyways.
That's true.
To get that nice kind of like crescendo of tension where we need to be in a safe area in a town in like something comfy to get a long rest overnight. Otherwise, if we're out camping or trying to rest in a dungeon, which you never let work for us anyways, which is totally fair.
Why would it? That's a terrible place to rest.
Right. It's like sleeping for 8 hours is just a short rest. So it's kind of a hybrid between the normal rest rules and the gritty realism rules. And so we need to go that route to get to that tension because otherwise then it's just people finding ways to cheese getting in a night's sleep and being back at full anyways, and that is definitely a killer momentum for the story and just does not feel good. With the group of new players, D&D new players that I'm DMing for, where I'm not doing any sort of like homebrew or hybrid rules. It's just the typical rest rules, and I've constantly had to be fighting ways for them to not take a long rest. Otherwise it's like, okay, this is just gonna it's not built around you getting a long rest after everything, but like, yeah, you could just kind of technically walk out of the dungeon and then I'm supposed to punish them with a bunch of random encounters every time they do that. And that just bogs the game down like crazy and it becomes just a grind for everybody. And I basically just kind of out of game, just told them, it's like, hey, D&D's not really built around that. Let's just say your characters don't want to sleep in this dungeon. You could get short rests. If something really creative happens, we could try it, but it's just going to be a no. I don't have an in-game reason for it. It's just a no.
That always feels good.
Right? That I missed our variant homebrew rules.
Yeah.
But it was like they were all new. I didn't want it. That would be confusing. And
that's an addition to the, like, remember what I said. It's like, what the hell are you talking about, Jeremy? You crack open their like official adventures and you're like, what the hell are you talking about, Jeremy? You just do not get 6 to 8 encounters. You've never written that. It's never been like
Yeah.
that. There's a long rest every 20 minutes.
Yeah, that always felt like them just trying to cover up the poor implementation in the first place. Like, well, obviously you're all just playing it wrong, and you watch their official games as well, and you're like, you guys don't do this ever.
Right.
So yeah, I think my main takeaway is from this, forming more of a decision after we've spoken about it. It is probably better to allow the fights to always kind of be at least full health and full other things. You have resources at your disposal. I liked, Will, your point about it allows you to always kind of have your toolbox, which means that you're making more impactful choices. You have more options for choices, and with the game being balanced around that, it just gets rid of all of the frustrations that we've felt with the D&D rest system.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
So next topic, one that has already come up a couple of times, but let's dive into the spellcasting. So the basis of the spellcasting is actually pretty similar in the two systems, where you have the in Pathfinder, you have Vancian casting is the methodology, which means that you are preparing a spell at a certain level, and you are only able to cast that spell in that slot, and then once it's cast, you forget it. This differs from 5th edition, as 5th edition, you have the ability to upcast. It's considered, I think, modified Vancian casting. There might be a different name for it, but if you have a second level or first level Cure Wounds spell prepared, you can upcast it up to 8th level, and you don't have to do any preparing for that. Whereas in Pathfinder, you have to prepare Cure Wounds or heal at 8th level in order to get those benefits if it can be upcast. So that alone is pretty different. Obviously, there's also what we talked about earlier, which is the action economy around spells. Most spell casting in Pathfinder is 2 actions to cast, or it can be cast with more actions depending on the spell. There's kind of a lot of variability there. So we have not played spellcasters. We've at least had spellcasters at the table to this point. So initial thoughts, Ellie, on spellcasting?
Well, like I said, I haven't really dove into it too much. But in terms of just kind of like a gut reaction to knowing the rules and comparing it to D&D, as I mentioned earlier, I love the flexibility of being able to commit multiple actions and how sustaining spells works, of spending an action to keep it going instead of just that binary concentration. And you get multiple sustained spells that could play off each other and a lot of really cool stuff. My gut reaction was I do not like how you have to prepare slots per spell. Because that feels just unnecessarily restricting. But I guess you do have a lot more flexibility in the other ways. But it is admittedly hard for me to come down with a hard opinion in either direction until I actually play that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it makes spellcasters feel less powerful, and that to me is good. It takes away that we see so much that spellcasters are considered just better than Marshall in 5th edition, because the spells are just so strong and you can do so much reality bending stuff with them, that being able to attack twice in a turn or 3 times in a turn if you get to level 11 just doesn't really compete with the abilities. Now that doesn't mean that spellcasting in Pathfinder completely removes that, but it definitely feels like you have to think about it more, and you're limited in what you're doing, because if you have one spell, you have less spells. You're going to have less spells prepared because you have to be putting things into higher slots if you want to get the intended effect. Will, before I continue to go, did you have any first thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that your intuition is correct. Spellcasting the issue with spellcasting was never like when you're level 6. It was when you're level 12. The game starts to feel really, really stupid. And we just, full disclosure, we're not there in Pathfinder. We didn't do a long campaign. We didn't go up to high levels. I'd love to, but I don't know what's beyond the veil in that sense. But initially, it just, like you said, Ellie, it feels good to be able to focus on multiple spells. The focus system seems cool to me. I like that a lot more than the weird short rest thing. And just my first character that was a spellcaster was a witch, and I was like, this is pretty cool. And looking through the spells, they just seemed, they did seem a little toned down, and I'm mostly okay with that.
Yeah, I definitely felt that aspect of it. Again, the highest we played is level 6, so that could go out the window later, as well said. But I was a fighter with 0 magic. I had a flail, a tower shield, and plate armor, and then almost everyone else in the party had spellcasting to some degree. And I did not feel like I was falling behind or had lack of options. What I could do in terms of tripping enemies with my flail and using that to provoke opportunity attacks when they stand up, or letting them pose a disadvantage from not literally disadvantage, but like a flat-footed condition from being prone and being able to hit things and tank hits and choose if I want to take cover behind my shield, raise my shield, take cover behind my shield, what I want to commit my reaction to. There was tons and tons and tons of choices and a huge decision space, which I loved. And again, it all felt on par into similar levels of control and damages penalty as the spellcasters. And that felt really, really good.
Yeah,
especially with, as we were talking about, everybody coming back to full, because that in D&D, that's where one of the big reasons of why you can't keep doing that, because if the spellcasters are always at full and knowing they will be, they completely blow non-spellcasters out of the water. It's not even close in terms of the capabilities, their damage, everything really.
Yeah, and the damage I think is a really good point too. Pathfinder spells, if you look through them, spellcasters are not blasters. It is actually pretty tough to make a damage dealing spellcaster in Pathfinder. You're generally better off focusing on buffs and debuffs and battlefield control, however you want to go and phrase the beyond of it. But you don't have things like Fireball, which are stronger spells at 3rd level because of legacy reasons and because you just think they're cool. Most things just aren't as good at damaging as a fighter, because it's giving each class kind of their own spot to say, you're good at this, you're good at this. And in terms of like the flexible casting, there are ways to get around that. The Bard, for example, does have the ability to upcast and whatnot without preparing at higher level slots. And I think a type of wizard does. I don't specifically remember top of mind right now. But still, you come into this area where you have to know what you are good at as a spellcaster, which actually does end up being difficult for new players with Pathfinder. One of the biggest complaints I see is people saying that spellcasters are underpowered compared to maybe what they're coming from in 5th edition, or just what their expectations are. And a lot of that comes from you need to really be thinking about what you're preparing, and you need to be making sure that you're focusing on the right stuff, because if you just come in trying to prepare damage spells, you get into these moments of failure where you're like, I'm not really doing anything, but I'm committing a lot to not do much. That's because damage isn't supposed to be your focus, because when it is, you start to outshine the other classes.
Mm-hmm.
I think Fireball actually was a terrible example for that.
But it's the one I always talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's the funny thing though, is like Fireball is still a 3rd level spell, and now it does 66 fire damage instead of 86. But the big thing, the big change is you look at cantrips, and cantrips in D&D effectively, especially the Warlock is the worst offender of this. It's just like a better version of any kind of weapon you could find on the ground. It's like, oh yeah, 3d10 plus your charisma. Like, that's
for free. That's often as you want at range.
Mm-hmm. Every round for the rest of your life, you're just better than a fighter.
Oh, and you can do neat stuff like
bullshit.
Pushing and pulling them or whatever.
Oh, the fighter can't do that. You can do that though. From range.
One subclass kind
also
of.
The range is 600
One subclass kind of, and it's limited, by the way.
Yeah, that's the issue with blasting, is just cantrips that were 1-to-1 compared to martial attacks. It's just, they shouldn't look as similar as they do, and they do, and it's just not fun.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll form more and stronger opinions about that as we continue to play. But my first thought so far has been it feels really healthy for the game, even if it's a different mindset you have to go into it with. And that is a positive.
Yeah. And for those who are familiar with higher level Pathfinder, definitely let us know in the comments about how he gets at higher levels with spellcasting.
Yeah, I want the rant that we give about spellcasting and everybody in the D&D community. I want to hear that about Pathfinder.
Yes.
Just your deranged opinions about how stupid it is. Please.
Continuing that conversation about classes being their own kind of niche, something that I've noticed as well, or something that feels different, is the fact that ranged attacks don't add your ability modifier to the damage, which might not sound really huge if you just listen to the words, but the implication is that range is doing significantly less damage than melee, which to me is massive, because right now in 5th edition, range generally is better because you get all of the damage options without any of the risk of being up close. 95% of the time, if you're fighting a creature, being right up in their grill is the worst place to be. You only get around that if you are a barbarian who's got high AC and resistant to damage and generally can tank hits a little bit better than...
And basically are artificially limited from taking range options. That's how they get around it.
Yes,
Barbarians
that's
aren't
true.
allowed to do ranged attacks
That's true.
without losing a bunch of their cool stuff.
Right. So seeing that, really, I think we had a ranger at our recent game. It made me realize, like, oh, there is a pretty big difference between the fighter and the ranger. And we saw it where the fighter was getting hit more often, putting yourself at risk, Ellie, every single turn, whereas the ranger is able to just sit back and just pop shots. Obviously, that's something to challenge in different encounters. Y'all fought like beasts that were specifically close range, but still that works for the enemies too, where they're doing less damage at range as well, making them less of a focus for PCs. Where right now, if I throw a ranger or a ranged combatant on the battlefield and a close-up martial person, I mean, the what's the word I'm looking for? The importance of them always goes caster first, range second, martial third, and that's just like set in stone every single time. It feels a little bit switched up with Pathfinder, almost reverse potentially. I don't have a strong opinion on that.
But yeah, I definitely agree. I love how ranged attacks just overall do less damage.
There was some kind of like meeting, an ill-conceived meeting where they looked at 3 different things: spell attacks, melee attacks, and ranged attacks. And they came to the worst conclusion that they should all just be the same. And I've always kind of hated that, but I got why. It's just the way it is. If you make it like I don't know, like a competitive multiplayer game, I guess that makes more sense. But this is not a competitive multiplayer game, and there should be a disadvantage for being in the safe spot away from the enemies.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. One final point I have around spellcasting is just in terms of complexity. I will say that if you are just trying to fill that fantasy of I want to be a wizard who shoots magic and is really cool, 5th edition does do a better job of handling that. And for new players, it is much less intimidating to play a spellcaster. Still intimidating. It's still difficult. And, you know, if it's a brand new player, I usually suggest they play martial versus a spellcaster. But it does feel like for Pathfinder, you have to know a lot more, because when your preparation is so important, you can't just kind of take a wide range approach and be good. You can actively be a detriment if you prepare bad spells. And that does make it a little bit tougher for new players. All right. So next, did you have something else, Ellie, to add on that?
Well, I was going to say that segues into the complexity of it. I don't know if you have, but you were kind of running the show here, so.
Yeah, it's my show. Fuck off. No,
what I was takes notes and has outlines. So
what I was going to move it to actually was the thing that you've been penting up this whole time: the feats for days. So in Pathfinder, the character creation is a lot more versatile. Ellie, please go into.
Oh, it's amazing! I love it. It's constantly throughout our Dungeons and Dragons coverage. I can't like link to a specific video because I don't know where I've said it, but I've said it over and over and over and over and over. I love
Link
it.
to all of our videos ever.
Yeah, just all of them, just rapid fire cards across the top of the screen. I love it when you get choices with your character creation. When subclasses like at level 3, you could pick one of these 3 things, like the Hunter Ranger. That does it. And I always talk about wanting to see more of that. And with 1D&D, don't like it when they take it away. And it's just I keep coming back to it. I'm so stuck on it, and I because I think that customization and flexibility is so important. And Pathfinder absolutely knocks it out of the park because every single class, there aren't really subclasses in the traditional sense of D&D. Every single class has all of that. You do get a kind of a core thing for the class, but the majority of it are things that every class gets at like level 5. Your ability scores go up at every second or third level. I don't remember what. You get a skill feat. And there's a couple things peppered in right away at like level 1 and stuff a little bit higher. But then really frequently, I think it's every other level for the most part, at least it was for the fighter, you get a class feat. And there's the level 1 class feats, the level 2 class feats, the level 4, the level 6 class feats, and on and on. And each one is unique, and each one goes to a different play style, and you can mix and match them. When you're at level 6, if you want to go back and pick another level 1 class feat, you can. You're not locked in like that. And it makes the character so unique, and you can pick and play who you want to play. And it's so satisfying. I did not feel locked in. So, for instance, in this campaign where I'm going to be playing it, I make it a fighter, and I want her to be a tank, which is something that's hard to do in D&D. But that's probably part of the reason why I want to, just because like I like playing tanks in RPGs, and just can't really do it in D&D. You can a bit more, but it's not magical bends and whatever. And now it's like there's a bunch of skill feats and class feats and weapons and actions and stuff I could take advantage of to do all that and build the character around it. And playing into being kind of the tank and protecting others, I want them to be able to kind of heal and have some sort of medicine aspect to them. And because of how Pathfinder works and the skills work, I can make himself trained in medicine, and I can now heal people, non-magically heal people as a tank, and it just beautifully fits that character. And if I so choose, I could dedicate and bump that up and get skill feats into the medicine skill and really focus on that in addition to being a tank. Or if I wanted to, I could be like a deceptive, or not deceptive, like a diplomatic noble, and put feats in that and choices in that, while also still just being able to be a fighter. I don't have to like play a bard to be good at talking, or play a cleric to be good at healing people, or be able to do a support. It's so flexible, and you can mix and match things. I love that.
Yeah, segment done. That's I mean, really, that kind of covers it. Will, do you have anything to add? I'll go with you first.
Yes. Oh. Let's talk about the wasteland that is D&D leveling up, because I just did it recently. What? I hit level 8 with my barbarian. You know what I got? I got like 16 more health points and 1 AC. You know what happens when you level up in Pathfinder? You're escorted down a path of wonderment and just pure joy. Everything is open. You experience what it's like to have childlike wonderment with the world. You just get new stuff. It's just a bouquet of joy every time you level up in Pathfinder.
Does anyone have anything negative to say about the differences?
It's
like realistically, there's something broken in there. I haven't found it yet. There's just a hunk of broken glass lying in every single one of these feat piles. I know it. I've only found the cool stuff that I love, but I'm just waiting to like grab the jagged piece of broken glass. It's like, whoa, that's horrible and ruins the game.
Yeah, I will say with such versatility comes the double-edged sword of inferior choices. Now that's more something that I'll say we'll keep an eye on as we keep playing. I definitely saw things as we were going through and as I was reading each of the classes, there are very often times I look at feats and I'm like, that looks worse, like inarguably worse than other options at this level for the kind of expected subclass progression. There's always going to be those landmines, and that increases as you increase the number. Whereas in 5th edition, most subclass things, most things that you get are generally just good, unless the subclass as a whole is bad. Kind of. I mean, there's there's no choice in it, so you're kind of just you accept that you get the it's how about this? It's the difference between getting a bunch of boxes and somebody says open one up and you open it up and it's a bomb, or somebody just kind of handing you one and it's just filled with a bomb or poop or whatever. It just sucks, and you're like, well, I didn't have a choice in it, so I guess that is my life. I chose the poop earlier, so I get the poop now.
The other advantage is you can just like kind of go back and get stuff. Like if you find like, oh, the 6th level feed pile for this class is just like better than the 8th level, you can just go back there. Mm-hmm. And you look at like D&D has so much less of this, because you've got like Totem Barbarian's a great example of what every class in this game has. And Totem Barbarian is just obviously broken. It's like, oh, do you want to be immune to all damage or be able to carry a slightly larger horse?
Carry the horses? I don't want to look into that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, when you're walking up the mountain with a horse, you can carry a horse of one size larger than you normally could carry.
Why are you carrying horses up the mountain?
Yeah, who wrote this?
Yeah, so that's very fair. Now, on the flip side, I will say that with less feats as well, you are able, and when I say feats in this case, I do mean like not just the class options, but like the actual feats, ability score increase, replacement feats. Those are usually more impactful and playstyle defining. Again, just simpler for newer players who kind of want less to choose from. Obviously, we've talked endlessly about feats that are much better than other options, but in general, 5th edition feats do make the game feel a lot better, and just overall make the feeling of ability score increase levels better. So playing without them would feel really weird, and in them, there's really not too many bad ones to choose from, just ones that are super good and ones that are super bad. There's like a couple on the spectrum, but usually it's more in the center. But I don't know. I'm just trying to fish for some good things to say. I really like Pathfinders too.
I was going to say at the beginning here, you said, oh, this isn't going to all be gushing on Pathfinder. It's been an hour and 4 minutes according to our recording time.
I'm trying.
I will say the ancestries are a mixed bag for me.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
In D&D, it's races, and Pathfinder, they use the term ancestry, but it's essentially the same idea. If you're playing a gnome, a halfling, an elf, a human. And I like the ancestries. They also, you get ancestry feats and heritage feats, which are very cool, and I like that, and that just additional flexibility. Like every X number of levels, you go back and pick another one. But they are all very much pushing you towards a certain sort of play style of that ancestry. And it makes it hard to play something that's not
against the
a
grain.
Trope. Yeah. It, even as far as a lot of ancestries have, you take a hit to an ability score. Like just in the level 6 thing that we recently ran, you were kind of pushing us like, oh, let's all be halflings. It was like in this halfling area of your world and village and all that. But I wanted to be a strength-based fighter with plate armor and a tower shield, and halflings get a penalty to strength. And like, I could not make the character feel really viable. I felt like I would have been really behind picking that. And I understand there's the argument of like, oh, we should just have a flawed character and you make up for it in other ways. Like, sure, that is an argument to make, but I don't like how it's hard-coded. Then, like, I mean, D&D very much got away from that, and I appreciate that, and I like that aspect.
I wonder if there are
beyond just the mechanics of it, and it's just, what are you going to say?
Oh, sorry. I wonder if there are recent variants to the Pathfinder rules that maybe we've missed in like the 17 rule books they've released, that allows you to break away from that, or if we're just making it a bigger deal than it is. I don't remember how much of a negative it is to strength for halflings. 2. Okay, so basically a +1 modifier that you're losing out on. So long term, maybe that's not a huge deal. I'm not sure. But regardless, I think that I have really liked how D&D post Tasha's, I believe it was, stripped out all of that and said, put your ability scores where you want, have fun with it. I could see Pathfinder going that direction as well. It seemed like this was kind of an anchor around their start, especially with how otherwise open their character creation feels. So yeah, wonder if there's variant rules for that.
I've always been of the mind that I don't care so much, but I think that the focus on like, oh, I can't have a flaw. I can't have a mechanical flaw. I've always kind of hated that attitude, but I totally also understand it and would never subject myself to it. It's like, you're wrong for caring about that, but I also care.
I guess I'm in a different boat. I personally like playing against that. I feel like D&D and TTRPGs are most fun in failure, but that might just be because of how infrequently I play a PC long term.
I'm all for having a flaw, but I don't want to build a fighter who's bad at fighting.
Sure. I don't know if a -1 means you're bad at fighting.
Sure. But then you have lower speed. Also health. That's another big thing.
Sure.
Your starting health is based on your ancestry plus your class. But I guess as you level up, that becomes less of a problem. Because how health goes, you get X amount of health for your class, like humans get 8. And then, I'm sorry, for your ancestry. And then an X amount plus your constitution for your class. So like fighters get 10 plus con. So if you have +2 and you're a human fighter, you start with 20 health. And then every level after, it's the 10 plus the con, the base starting of 8. So like picking a class that starts with 6 as like a fighter could feel kind of shitty, but I guess it does go away.
Yeah, it's
over time. It just depends how quickly you level.
This seems like a first 3 levels issue.
Yeah.
For all of it. Once you start to be able to boost up your ability scores even more, the ability scores increase faster in Pathfinder than they do in 5th edition. So I don't know. Leave a comment. We are maybe not experienced enough to have strong opinions on that. Do the ancestry modifiers matter that much? Yes or no? Or in between?
But another aspect of character creation is it is really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not opening to people new to TTRPGs at all. Like, I mean, we've been playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition since they were playtest packets, and Will and I started actually in 3.5, and I've been playing various RPGs my entire life, and we're on a podcast on it and talk about it, and like, I am a knowledgeable person on that stuff, and I found the first time I went through to make a character in Pathfinder 2nd edition was quite the task. Sitting there going over the book, they'll reference something that I have no idea what it is, and I have to find it elsewhere, and constantly flipping back and realizing I'm screwing things up and trying to keep all the choices in my head that I can make, and feeling like I'm doing something wrong or I'm making a really bad choice. I did get through it, and I ended up, now I'm at a point where I'm not comfortable with it because I've made a handful of characters, manually leveled them up from 1 to 6 and things like that, and do quite enjoy it now, but it is not welcoming to newcomers. And especially then with Pathfinder in general is not. And I think that kind of leads into one of the biggest reasons to like not adopt it to your table.
Yeah.
Because like we're sitting here, we've gushed about it for over an hour now, nothing but amazing things to say. But like that's because we're ultra nerds. Right? It's like we literally run a D&D podcast, a TTRPG podcast.
What did you just call me? An ultra nerd?
Like we obsess on this stuff. Nerd. We focus on the stuff. We love it. Yes. We think about it in our free time. We look through the books and remind ourselves we're the people that other players come to for questions. It's like it's just who we are with it. And so this like really
finicky,
complex, finicky, but really tactical and customizing system is amazing for us. For like other players at our table. And I'm not going to start like dropping names, but because I mean it's not an insult anyways. But like I don't know if
he doesn't watch the podcast. It's fine. Yeah. Logan's a big dumb idiot. He will not get Pathfinder. He's screwed for the next 3 years. Sorry, Logan. That's a YouTube short. Make it a short. I'm going to share it with him.
Okay. No, Logan is not a big dumb idiot, but he is not as into D&D as we are, and getting him to commit to Pathfinder, I don't know if he's going to go along with that. And I don't want to like switch to Pathfinder, but lose a core member of our table.
Oh no,
And
I think so. You're right. There's a demographic of people, and it's pretty narrow. That's playing D&D and says, "You know what? I wish this game was a lot more
Yeah.
complicated." That's a real demographic, and
That's
hey,
us. Yeah.
we're in.
Yeah.
We're in. But I think it's not that bad, and the biggest issues I think are because Pathfinder. I don't know why this is, but Wizards of the Coast put the effort into making a very accessible game, both in mechanics and getting into it. Pathfinder is the most just like all over the place book I've read in a while. It's really, you need to look something up online, I think, to have a good time making your first character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I still don't think that I will be making for like one shots. I run with strangers and such who've never played a TTRPG before. I will not play Pathfinder with them, and I know there are people online who will disagree with that and say that Pathfinder is just as accessible as any TTRPG. I do not agree with you,
No.
and that is.
No, you're wrong. You are objectively wrong. We could create a study of people who've never played these games ever and see who has an easier time making a character. And it's hands down.
Yeah.
D&D.
And as you,
D&D 5th edition was revolutionary for getting people who are just like normal, regular people who don't think about buying dice to start thinking about buying dice. It was a miracle.
it was actually an entire conspiracy by dice makers to get more people into TTRPGs. They pushed for 5th edition to be simpler so that more dice could be sold. And it worked. I spend a lot, probably 1/4 of my discretionary income on dice every month. Using the code MM10s, that way I save 10% off at FanRoll Dice. Fanroll.com? Yeah. There it is. That's going to be our best segue. That's 2. This has been a great episode, everyone. Let's just take a second, give ourselves pats on the back. Yeah. All right. But we're not done yet. We got more stuff to talk about. And let's move off of the feat stuff. I think that's we've driven that one into the ground. Next, we've kind of already talked about this, but I do want to just point out again the martial options being so much more versatile. This, I think we saw a lot with your fighter character at level 6, Ellie. It is really refreshing seeing martials have so many options that we haven't even gotten into entirely yet. And I think we saw it a lot with Will, your character in, Sword Face McGinty?
Two Swords McGinterson.
Two Swords McGinterson. The swashbuckler pirate that you played in the beginner box dungeon crawl, who was doing so much as a martial. The demoralize ability, the tumble through, like all of these things that were just like you felt like you had a lot of options and you were doing a bunch of different things. And then we see Ellie coming in with a fighter and you're doing a lot of things, also being a very martial based class. And it's totally different than what Will was doing with his character. And oh my God, that is so refreshing. Because even a rogue to a fighter feel like they're more or less doing the same thing, except for a rogue's trying to get sneak attack and a fighter is pressing the A button over and over and over again.
For sure. Yeah, we definitely talked about that throughout the episode already. Just the bigger decision space.
Something that we haven't talked about is something that I have mixed but leaning positive feelings of is equipment.
Yes.
In D&D, there's a right answer here. It's you have one thing to pick. Anything else is objectively
right. The
worse.
rogue picks the rapier if they want to be martial.
Pathfinder still actually has a rapier problem, but there's a lot of cool stuff in there hidden. The way that shields work, the way that armor works, the way that offhand weapons work. For instance, we talked about this right out of the gate. I hate offhand weapons because they're stupid and not real, but it's a great way to get a bonus action attack. In this one, it's a great way to block or disarm somebody. It gives you something that isn't a way to fish a bonus action attack. It gives you something to do like that's unique to you. And this was the swashbuckler didn't end up doing this, but I was like looking into what to do. And one of the things was to grab like a disarming dagger essentially. And that would give me something to do with my action if I didn't just want to attack.
Yeah, the equipment in general, especially weapons, is there's a lot more options and there's a lot more versatility to them. And every weapon has features of different things they could do and how they impact stuff beyond just like piercing, bludgeoning, or slashing damage, or being like two hand or not. So that's really cool.
Yeah,
Just kind of look through and
one
pick
of
what's fitting and
and I'm sure with Pathfinder, like yes, you can try and pick what's fitting for your flavor, but also you're picking what is good for your play style. I want
right.
to say that for fifth edition, like oh well, there's less wrong choices, but that's not even true. There's really just there's only a few just categorically good choices, and everything else is generally considered a waste of your time. And that's such a shame. Like every single time somebody's wanted to use a cool weapon in fifth edition, we have had to homebrew it. And
Hmm.
that's such a shame. Like, oh, I want to play a rogue, but I don't want to use a rapier. All right, here's a scimitar that basically acts like a rapier, but is going to not make you feel mechanically worse. You know, you couldn't have gone with the scimitar because oh, it actually gives me this and fits into this play style. Or what was it recently? I think somebody wanted to play with like a sickle or something, and it's like, well, that's a D4, so that's actually a waste. Like, just don't do that. It is
Hmm.
mechanically not a good idea, and that just I don't know. It feels like such a shame.
Yeah, and then with weapons and armor, they have different categories, which on their own do nothing, but then you get different class features that can interact with them or unlock them. I know fighter at some level, I think maybe it was level 5, you can become a master in a particular weapon category. And so that boosts up your plus to hit and all that, your proficiency in it. And then you also unlock a crit specialty. And then there's an area in the book where it says like anything that's the as the brutal category or the bludgeoning category does this on a crit, flails on a crit, automatically knocks someone prone, and it just kind of furthers that more. Armor gets stuff too. Like I know, like full plate armor, they're like full plate and half plate, where they look really similar, um, just on based on stats and like AC and stuff that they give. But half plate has or full plate has like the bulwark. Um, Feature to it, which helps with AoEs and taking damage, and also you can then like add +3 to your reflex saves instead of having to use your dex, which you don't have any, and just a bunch of different cool things like that.
Yeah,
And that's just like the tip of the iceberg because all armor has pluses and minuses.
Hmm.
Whereas in D&D armor was worse than weapons by like an order of magnitude of what is right and what is wrong. And it's almost universally the expensive one at the end of your armor category. You're going to get it.
Hmm.
End of story. There's no uniqueness to it. In Pathfinder, you kind of choose where you want to go. Everything has its positives and everything has its minuses. And they did a remarkably aggressive job of being like, hey, plate armor, you sure about that, buddy? Because you get like -10 speed penalty and check penalties. And that's the cost of getting the highest AC in the game.
Yep.
yeah, not just a 1,500 gold cost that you basically have by level 5 and then never think about again.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can negate those penalties where all of them have strength requirements, and they start negating the penalties based on how high you are at, which is cool. Also,
To oh, go ahead.
I say also on equipment, we should talk about magic items.
That was
and
what I was going to
runes. That's what
do.
you're doing.
I was
Okay.
about to segue it. Yes, magic items. Magic items were actually a hot bit of discussion for our chat for a little bit here because at level 6, there is an expectation in Pathfinder that you have a certain amount of magic items to make the math of the game work correctly, which scared me as a DM because I didn't really look into the magic items yet. And 6th level in Dungeons and Dragons isn't really that high. And if you don't give anyone magic items, the game's playing fine. It's not a problem at all.
Hmm.
Now, I did see kind of differing opinions from the Pathfinder perspective. Maybe magic items aren't necessary to just make a one shot or something. But regardless, there is kind of like a expected equipment, and it's very much listed out. Magic items in Pathfinder also have levels where they're level 1, level 2, level 3. Whereas in 5th edition, we have rarities: common, uncommon, rare, legendary. There might be one more in
Artifact, I
there.
think.
Yeah, artifact might be more than legendary, which like legendary artifacts or things. So I don't know why they need to be different, but that is besides the point. I'll say my first thoughts on magic items was definitely the wow, that is overwhelming. This was probably one of the first times that while GMing for Pathfinder, I was like actually kind of put off because I was so confused. Did get it sorted out finally, but there's like not just the magic items, there's also the runes, which are to be inscribed on weapons and armor, which are kind of your way of getting +1s and +2s and your minor incremental improvements versus magic items, which are potentially play style changing or just overall your wonderment items and whatnot. Whereas D&D, it's all kind of that's an uncommon sword, so it's a +1, and give that to your players when it makes sense. We don't really give a shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely love how the magic items have levels, which
Yes.
just makes it so much simpler. We were talking about that for a while outside of all this, obviously, of how hard it is to say, all right, this is an uncommon magic item. What level is appropriate? And then if you look at all uncommon magic items and all rare magic items, there is a huge deviation between them. And so it's like, it's very, very much up to the DM just to figure out, all right, is this going to break my game and screw up balance, or is it okay to give them?
It's probably one of the more common complaints you see in the D&D community is I accidentally gave my party X magic item and now my game sucks. That is really bad because then you run into that issue of if I take this away, are my players going to feel like I've ruined something for them? And, you have to have that out of character conversation of, hey, everyone, I gave you something too good. Can we hand wave this and either pretend it doesn't exist or nerf it or whatever? In the immediate have not felt that with Pathfinder, even with it almost felt like I was free to give you magic items. I am still scared after 8 years now of playing D&D. I am scared to give out magic items. I fret over them. I tune them to your specific use because there is such a wild amount of times where I've given something and it's way too powerful, or I've given something and it's so useless that it sits in your bag of holding for the entire campaign and never comes out. So when I make something, I try so hard to make sure that it is useful, consistently useful, and is not going to break the game. And that's hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no good options. Not no good. There's very few options in the DMG that just come out of the oven ready to go like that.
Yeah. That's not to say it can't happen in Pathfinder. I don't think we're familiar enough of all the magic items out there. So that's another thing. For those really familiar with Pathfinder, let us know. I mean, how is magic items handled? Is it just as easy to break your game, so to speak, in Pathfinder, or make a player, a particular character, way too strong by giving them a specific magic item? Runes I really love. We basically do runes in D&D through a homebrew, because runes in Pathfinder, as Jared was saying, are you get like rune inscriptions and you put them on your equipment, and this increases the AC by +1, 2, 3, so on, or the plus to hit by 1, 2, 3. And there's also striking wounds where it adds an extra damage dice, so your D6 flail becomes a 2d6 flail, becomes a 3d6 flail. That's also how damage goes up, because it's not like at 5th and then 11th and 20th you get 2, 3, 4 attacks or whatever, or sneak attack dice going up, or your smites getting more powerful or anything like that. There is sneak attack that goes up, I'm sure, but that is how you do more damage, are the striking wounds. It's like the game is very much balanced around those. If you leave them out, you're going to be falling behind, and balancing is going to become very difficult, is my understanding around it. But they're like in the back of the book, and there's like no indication about them, which we could circle back to in a minute. But in addition to all that, there's also, I forgot the name of them, but I'm going to call them utility runes. That is not the name. I'm sorry, I don't have the book up in front of me. Where you could apply them to equipment, and they have different effects. When you hit, this could happen, or you have the option to have it do X, Y, and Z. Which I love that customization further, as what we talked about, and how many you could do is tied to the plus to hit of the base rune. And again, it's getting a little complicated, as we talked about as well. but it does feel nice. It feels good. I love that customization and that option. And it's always good go-to rewards for your party to get those runes and different options of cool runes they could get. And like I said, in 5th edition D&D in our campaigns, we've done it for 2 campaigns now where we found this homebrew, and we can link a description if linking a name on it. We didn't make it, but it's a really cool one where it gives that customization where you could spend gold to have your weapons or armor customized to do different things. And I know that has been a huge hit at our table. We have all absolutely loved it. Where like we could start out with some sort of weapon at level 1 that is important to our character in some way and hold on to it through the entire game because we could upgrade it. We could make it magical. We could customize it to the ways we want. We could have it crit on a lower number or do a bit more damage or do all sorts of other cool things. And these weapons grow with us instead of just getting like our family's heirloom that's super important. This gets replaced level 5 because it's a +1 magic sword.
Yeah, this is a pretty popular supplement, but
Yeah.
I feel like we should say it. It's the Heavy Arms, the Complete Armorer's Handbook, and
That's it.
the contact info for the person who created it is at DM Heavy Arms. They're on DM's Guild /Heavy Arms. I tweak it for
Link
our
in the
campaign.
description.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description. But it's funny because we've used this, we've loved it. I'm even in this campaign going to be implementing a rune system that you all are finally getting to. As you're in the Burning Lands, you've got some sun gems. I'm ready for you guys to get some runes on your weapons. I'm super excited about it. And then I look at Pathfinder and I'm like, it's all here. It's all already here. I've not only had to find a homebrew for 5th edition, but I've had to tweak that homebrew to fit our specific campaign and my needs with it, and that is exhausting. D&D is it is a lot of work to balance it and to find the play style that I've wanted to reach. There, I said it. I'm tired. I'm tired of DMing for 5th edition. Which, if we're good with magic items, I'm sure we could keep going, but I know episode's getting long. Brings me to monsters. We are monsters in multi-class. We founded this on the principle of discussing monsters, and all that it has done has made me hate 5th edition monsters. It's sad. It hurts every time we look up something cool. I look at the flavor and it sounds awesome, and it has the exact same abilities as 50 other monsters. And it's not even good out the box. It still needs to be tweaked in order to be an actual challenge against the party that it's supposed to be difficult against. I feel like I have a good grasp on the challenge rating system. I feel like I know what I need to do in order to make a monster difficult. That has taken time. When we first started playing, it was not great running out of the box encounters or trying to make my own encounters based on CR or whatever. We had a lot of times where you guys absolutely destroyed the combats. And I remember getting really frustrated actually in my first year or two of DMing, and specifically saying like, I need to figure out encounters because this isn't working. And the fact that it has taken this long to feel like super comfortable with tweaking monsters, with adding things and making combat difficult, I don't know. I have just so many feelings, and they're mostly just and like vomiting in a corner because I'm just monsters in 5th edition need help. They really do. Thoughts?
I have not DM'd Pathfinder, so it's hard for me to weigh in on that.
Fair.
What I have seen, we have fought some cool monsters and creatures and enemies, and based on what you've said, they were just out of the box, not homebrewed, and they've all felt really different, and that was really cool. And I also like how I don't know how they managed the balance of it, where you could throw one strong monster against the party of 4. And it works. It still works. It's still a good fight. We're in D&D that doesn't happen because of the action economy. 1 versus many is just going to get stomped into the ground, no matter, unless you get to the point where they're just going to completely destroy the party. So I've liked that.
Yeah, that has been super nice. One thing that's also really nice is it has the added benefit of being really easy to tweak. There's actually strengthened and weakened versions of every single creature in Pathfinder. So if you find one that's like, oh, this is a pretty good monster, it fits the flavor of what I'm looking for, but it's a couple challenge ratings too high, there's specific rules that say drop this by this amount, drop this by this amount, and you've got yourself a weakened creature that should be this level, which CR officially is trying to do, but it doesn't. It just does not work that way.
It's probably worth noting that the direction D&D is going is also not good.
No, we've talked about that a lot.
It sucks. And, giving your random creatures a ranged attack that also, like, one hits party members is not fun.
Was it the Archdruid that we really...
Yeah.
Oh,
it was a lot of
that
those things.
Yeah.
But in Pathfinder, there's a flexibility that is granted by this system. And this is, they're not screwing up D&D monsters because they're stupid or hate us. It's because the system doesn't lend them flexibility that they need. So the action economy with 3 actions is humongous for giving things very cool stuff. And one thing we haven't mentioned is resistances and weaknesses, which D&D, like with Advantage, took the hammer and said, you either double it or have it. End of story. That's not fun and it breaks stuff. In Pathfinder, you get a number. So now you have to do addition, but you can flavor things better.
Yeah. You see resistances and vulnerabilities coming out a lot more with the monsters, and it becomes very apparent that the resistance and vulnerability setup in 5th edition is just it's too narrow. It is just too narrow.
I say, yeah, and were you saying resistances and vulnerabilities for monsters? It's not just halved damage or
correct.
Damage,
you have
right?
a level of resistance. So in Pathfinder, if you have fire resistance 5, that means that you resist any fire damage up to 5 points, and it negates. It's a damage threshold.
Yeah,
that's the easiest way to put it. So yeah, with that, it in 5th edition, if you have, let's say, piercing damage and the thing's resistant to piercing damage, you're like, well, I'm useless. Whereas in this, it's like, well, if I can do enough damage, maybe it's still okay. I mean, you want to avoid it, obviously, but if it's your only option, it doesn't feel like you're totally wasting it, unless you can't do more than the 5 damage, in which case, yeah, you are totally wasting your time.
Right.
So, like, for example, a Frost Giant in Pathfinder has damage weakness 10 to fire. Imagine giving vulnerability to fire to a Frost Giant in your D&D campaign. You're like looking at a seriously different encounter. Your party is probably going to genocide the Frost Giants if they have the right spellcasting.
and
it's not going to be fun.
Clarify on the vulnerabilities, when it says 10 fire, that means that if you do 1 fire damage or 30 fire damage, you add plus 10. And that's its vulnerability. So it does an additional 10 damage every single time. So when you have, I don't know how much Frost Giant health is in Pathfinder, let's just say 250, it's a 36 or a fireball that does 36 damage. In D&D is now doing 72, where it's now doing 46 in Pathfinder. It's good. It makes you feel like it's a good choice, but it doesn't feel like you're breaking the game.
Right.
So yeah, monsters feel better. Monsters feel a lot better. And I feel like a kid in a candy shop every time I look at a new Pathfinder monster. Even the low challenge rating ones, low challenge rating beasts even, all have something that makes them feel somewhat unique. Be it a bear that has some 2 attack action that lets them, slash and slam, and you're like, ooh, this is like the rune bears in Elden Ring. I don't know if that's a thing, but that's a thing you could do, and it makes sense, and there's mechanics for it. I've been playing Elden Ring. I'm sorry. That's it's sitting in my mind.
A year later.
I'm a patient gamer. What can I say? I saved $12 on it, Will. All right. That's $12 for waiting a year. And I had to buy it through some scammy website. Had to make a second Steam account that I then family shared onto mine. Total waste. Should not have done it.
Absolute state of patient
gamers. It was on sale like a month after. I should have just bought it. Let's move on. Enough about the monsters. Let's get into the other half of our show, which is multi-classing. Not a ton to say on this, but it is different, and I feel like it's worth talking about for us. I mean, we're a multi-classing podcast.
Yeah, I'm admittedly not super comfortable or familiar with those rules.
It's really basic.
So yeah.
Multiclassing in Pathfinder isn't taking levels in a different class. It is taking feats from that class, generally meaning that you are foregoing a feat from your class and taking it from whatever. And it kind of has set paths for each one. Like if you want to multiclass into Barbarian, here are the feats you can take, and it won't break the game. And it's not going to give you absolutely everything. It's a little bit less finicky in terms of requirements and like what you get and what you don't get when you multiclass. And overall, it's a little less fun. You know, it's not as exciting. Multiclassing in 5e, we've obviously come to love for the flavor reasons, for the mechanical reasons of just interesting builds that might surprise you. I don't think you're going to get that surprise in Pathfinder nearly as much. And that's another one that, leave a comment if I'm wrong, because always possible. But, you know, like I don't know if 5th edition does it well. Like, it's easy to point to a lot of broken multiclasses. We have talked about a lot of broken multiclasses in both directions. And instead, with Pathfinder, you get a little bit more consistency. The curve is flattened. Is that good? Is it bad? It's different. And I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss it if we move to Pathfinder.
Sure. So the flavor aspect's still very much there. So I think it's actually easier so it's just you foregoing a class feat from your core class too, right? You're not like health isn't different, spell progression's not different.
Correct.
None of that. Okay. It definitely makes it a lot easier to do then. What are requirements? Are there ability score requirements? Or...
I would have to pause and look something up.
Okay. It's whatever. It's not that important. But
you go ahead. You keep talking. I'll see if I find it.
Yeah, limitations. So in that sense, it can be kind of nice, like hearing all that, and like they call it archetypes, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like so I got going back to like the character I'm building for this long campaign who was a fighter who has some focus in medicine, so she could do some out healing and things like that. Picking up an archetype in something that will help her healing sounds a lot more viable and less of a commitment than like multi-classing into cleric would be in 5th edition.
Oh, there are the prerequisites are stat based. So like to archetype into an alchemist, you need intelligence of 14. So pretty similar in that regard.
Yeah, similar style thing. Yeah, at least it's not 13. I always hated that in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know why they do it like that, but whatever.
I don't know.
And it feels like it would be a lot more viable. Like I primarily want the character to be a fighter who's in plate armor and tanking and doing some single enemy battlefield control and things like that, with this secondary focus on healing, and be able to take an archetype in something that will help with that a little bit. Feels like it might fit better and be more flavorful, and kind of further realize that character without the huge commitment of multi-classing.
Will, any thoughts?
Yes, this is good. We talked about Will's mysterious big book of multiclass, which is just like a fractal of madness of every single class needs to be explicated explicitly what it does. Yeah. And it's just one of those kind of
it's baked in
Lovecraftian projects that could only drag you to the depths of darkness. But Pathfinder took an interesting and different approach where they said, essentially, this is what you can pull out of each one of our classes. And I think that was wise. I think it's restricting in a good way. I struggled, like looking at it, you can't do that much. You can't do as much as you can in D&D, because D&D has very few strictures on what you can do with it. But you can do what you generally want to do. And I think that's the best way to go about it. Make sure people can't do things you don't want to do. Empower them to do things that they do want to do.
Yeah, that said, we probably can't get an entire show out of it. So I don't know if that's really gonna... Can we milk that one? Maybe not. All right, so those are all of my high level points that I wanted to touch. Is there anything that I haven't brought up that you all want to talk about comparison wise?
So not a specific like point of difference to bring up, but I think we should address the question of if we think people should switch, what our thought is on that. And then that way I can also use that to like bait people in the title and the thumbnail, because that's pretty clickable. If Like, I can't do that if we don't actually address the question.
Could you imagine watching this for an hour and 40 minutes and being like, I wonder what their opinion's going to be as to whether or not people should switch?
Yeah, I'll chapter mark it so people can jump to it if they want, because this is not going to be close to a 2-hour episode. But
yeah. Well, all right, Ellie,
two-hour episodes in a row, possibly.
What do you think? Should people switch to Pathfinder? Like, we'll just say this, ignoring any social obligations to the world. Because I think I've got
like the OGL stuff and
and
yeah.
Hasbro as a company versus Paizo, which is like seeming a lot better as a company.
Sure. It's so dependent on your table, and I know that is somewhat a cop-out answer, but if it's what answer any honest person's going to really give, I want to switch. Jared, I know you want to switch. Well, I think you want to switch. It doesn't mean we're going to, though, because as I kind of hit on earlier, it's as much as I love the gamey aspects and the customization and the increased tactics and flexibility and things for me to sink my teeth into, and also just new to me things, which is always good. That's not why I actually play Dungeons & Dragons or any TTRPG, really. I play it to get together with my friends on a regular basis and sit around a table and tell cool collaborative stories and make fun moments and personify a character and work things through with them and go through character growth and get to play someone else for a little bit, because I think that's a lot of fun.
And make dick jokes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
It's that. And I could do that in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I could do that in Pathfinder 2nd edition. I could do that in Call of Cthulhu. Like, I could do that in any number of systems. So you kind of pick what clicks best for your table and is going to facilitate that. And despite how we just spent the past hour, 45 minutes absolutely gushing about how much we love everything with Pathfinder, it's a big commitment to switch. There's been a lot of money and time invested into 5th edition. We've become very accustomed to the tools and the online tools. We know, very familiar with it. It's very easy for us to introduce new players to the table, help out people who are like that kind of role playing, hang out with friends, just play the game aspect, but not the super rules heavy aspect of it, and kind of like help them out. Where switching to Pathfinder is throwing all that out the window, buying new stuff, getting accustomed to new tools, possibly losing members at the table because it's just too much of a headache for them to switch, or if we want to introduce someone else, not quite sure how to do about it. And all that to me might be enough to just not want to switch, because at the end of the day, I just want to hang out with my friends and do cool shit.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. For our table specifically, 4 out of the 6 of us, I think, have that mindset, and the other 2 are along for the ride. And one of them's my wife, and she'll play Pathfinder. She doesn't care. So that's 5 out of 6, and we got one player who, honestly, they'll come around on it. Not to take away from your point, I think you're spot on. It is a table decision to make, and it's not for every table. Honestly, if we were playing with a group that we had, we'll say 5 years ago, where it was more like 3 out of the 6 of us might have been interested in something crunchier, and the other 3 were, pretzels and beer type players, which there's nothing wrong with at all. I wouldn't bother. It's not worth it. It was hard enough to remind them that they have to declare that they're attacking recklessly, or why they should attack recklessly, to get like those simple concepts across were tough enough. I'm not going to make them struggle through character creation just because I don't want to tweak monsters as much anymore. I mean, as much as I want to complain about it, you're right. At the end of the day, I want to play with my friends, and I want to make sure they're all having a good time. And when the rules start to become a detriment to that instead of a boon, then that's when you call it and say, let's not bother with that. Mm-hmm. And I know, again, a lot of people will say that Pathfinder isn't as complicated to run for new people. I think that there is some truth to that, in that the adventure paths written by Paizo are miles ahead of anything written by Wizards of the Coast. I mean, if you've watched the show, I hate every single adventure path written for Dungeons and Dragons besides Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and even that still needs a lot of tweaking. Whereas the general consensus I've seen with Paizo is that they're solid. They take a lot of the load off the GM to move things along, to distribute magic items, to just generally have good encounters designed right out the gate, and have a story that's comprehensive and allows freedom. I mean, those are all the things that I've been asking for those types of paths. But I don't like running set paths anyways. So if you're the type of GM who wants to come out the gate running homebrew, you better be ready to do some work, because Pathfinder is going to be harder to understand right out the gate compared to 5th edition, where maybe after 6 months, I was probably comfortable running my own adventures and such. I obviously am doing that right now with Pathfinder on like a one shot. I'm sure I can figure it out because I'm going to obsess over it until I get it right, because that is my mentality when it comes to GMing. Not everyone has that, and not everyone needs to have that to have fun playing this type of game. Will, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the tragedy in this situation for Paizo is that we are part of a weird narrow demographic that our fantasy improv simulator, we don't like the math. And that's the sell. That's the sell for Pathfinder. It's, do you not like the math in your fantasy improv simulator? There have always been crunchier, better strategy games. I'm like a big strategy gamer. That's like what I do. And D&D is just terrible for it. But it's great for hanging out with your pals and pretending to drink in a bar while being, some kind of warrior or barbarian. It's fun. It's funny. It's hilarious. And I think about it. And just because we don't like the math, I think most people actually would not get a lot out of a switch to Pathfinder, which is sad, but like the reality. I think our audience probably is a little bit crunchier than most, though.
Like hippie wise? We got any hippies? Some crunchy hippies? No. No, I think that's spot on. It's funny you say that too, because I feel like you've been playing simpler and simpler characters almost out of like a I don't know, resistance to 5th edition. You're like, it's not worth it.
Yeah,
it's not
because I don't like it. That's like a concession I'll make. I do not like the way you optimize D&D. It makes me annoyed.
Yeah.
More than it makes me happy that I'm doing big number.
Interesting.
And I think it's a little bit of, it's not so much burnout. It's just like, I know what to do.
Yeah. I could make a coffee lock. Why would I bother?
Can you think of the last time you saw something online? It's like, whoa, I didn't think of that build in D&D. I can't.
Genuinely speaking, it's when we talk about a multi-class that was not talked about by the community. That's like the only time where I've had that thought. And that's, I guess, patting myself on the back a little too much, but it's true. I mean, the optimized things have been found, and they're usually pretty boring.
And this is another thing that's a little bit on the meta side, is that Paizo has like no money and they have no audience. I looked at their socials and stuff like that. And it's just like orders of magnitude compared to D&D. D&D is making $100 million films. Paizo is, got 50,000 followers on Twitter. It's insane how much they put out, though.
Yeah.
Because I've read a lot of their books and I'm just blown away with the quality. What was the last D&D book that was released? It's like
Dragonlance?
They've got,
I think by the time this releases, they might have the new Golden Vault adventure path that has not gotten any marketing.
They have, there's a productivity problem at WotC that is not in Paizo. And if you want like just an absolute treasure trove of stuff, every time I open one of these books, I'm like, that is cool. I don't want to be negative, but I really don't feel that with WotC these days.
No, and I think to continue on that meta side, I listened to an interview with Chris Perkins, I believe. No, I'm sorry, it was Todd Kendrick is his name. Do you all know who I'm talking about? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Is he one of the designers?
Yes, he's one of
Perkins was.
Yes, it was Todd Kendrick or Kenrick.
Okay.
Kenrick. And he's the head of Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm sorry if I'm getting his title wrong, but listening to him talk about 5th edition, even a couple years ago, was very much discussing how they focused on accessibility. They focus on like this perfection of accessibility that I think has become a bit of a detriment to the brand from our standpoints, but has done fantastic commercially. And for that reason, like, I have nothing but positive things to say about 5th edition to strangers who don't give a crap about this stuff, because I want more people in the TTRPG scene. I want this to be a more accepted thing, because it's awesome and I love it. And if there are games out there that are going to get people into it so that the ultra nerds like us can find the more kind of niche, crunchy, whatever stuff, then like bring it on. You know, I want that. So like, let's keep it going. And that's it. Let's keep it going.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think we should wrap it up. Long episode again.
Yeah, well, you know, it's worth it. If you all have any thoughts, feelings, let us know if you're planning on switching or if you've already made the switch. I know we've had a lot of people over the years telling us to check out Pathfinder. Thank you, as usual, to our patrons, Ed G, Cameron C, Brian H, Craig A, Isaac M, Luca L, Jeff W, Star Shinobi, Vincent M, Muddleweight, Bob F, Joe P, Rick D, Central D20, Tyler S, Gray, Barons, Adam A, and Rob K. Really appreciate the support. If you want to support the show, you can head on over to monstersandmulticlass.com/support, where you can find our Patreon. You'll get access to episodes early most of the time, as well as show notes, other things. And you can also find our other affiliates, like Fanroll Dice, where you can save 10% off using the code MM10 and get yourself some beautiful dice, as well as dice accessories. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us for this longer episode. And Ellie,
As always, thanks for watching.
there you go.
We just pre-record that.
It just switches to you in like a different, like, whatever, the same
Yeah.
clothing every single time.
Right.